Let's get back to what's going on in Washington and remotely as well with this House Judiciary Subcommittee hearing featuring the tech CEOs. Tom Forte is joining us now. He's D.A. Davidson's senior research analyst, frequent guest of the program, focuses on technology. Tom, we've been asking everyone sort of what to expect from today, what the outcome will be. Is there one of these CEOs that you're particularly interested to hear from?
So having had the opportunity to read Jeff Bezos' comments, which were put out yesterday, I thought they were very interesting. And I do unfortunately think, though, that it's going to be more of a dog and pony show. If you think about the House Judiciary Committee meeting they had with representatives from these four companies, not the CEOs, they made it sound like it was back in the earliest days of the internet when you heard about who they're calling as their competition. So I do worry that it may be more of a dog and pony show. And at the same time, though, I think the walls are closing in. I do think that regulatory risk is very significant for Amazon in particular and for Google and Facebook. I think Google and Facebook clearly operate a duopoly in digital marketing. And I think that they're at risk of antitrust measures in that regard. But as far as today's hearings go, I think it's going to be a lot of names blast from the past as far as who these companies are calling as their competition.
Tom, has Congress bitten off more than it can chew, though? There's so many separate issues. For instance, with Amazon, you got the issue of acquiring products or technology from those who used to sell on the platform. That could be an issue. With Google, it's a different issue. So are we going to have one succinct message here?
So I do think that Congress is behind as far as their understanding of all the issues that are at play here. But I think the fact that they're having this hearing is encouraging, because the challenge for the global society is that you have four companies, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google, that have a disproportionate amount of influence on consumers' lives. So while Congress may not fully appreciate all the individual things that are going on and all the reasons why that's a problem, I think it's good that they're having this hearing in general.
Tom, should they have just split this up, though? I mean, there's so many disparate arguments here. Google and Facebook are advertising. Amazon it's e-commerce and AWS. Apple has nothing to do with any of that. It's all based on its app store. Would this have been a smarter move to just have separate hearings? And do you think that it's a dog and pony show, or would be a dog and pony show on purpose?
So to the extent I view this as more of a starting point, I think it's okay to have all four companies rather than to have them individually. You made some excellent points there on Apple. Apple is almost an afterthought versus the first three. And if you look at how they listed this House Judiciary Committee, they didn't go in alphabetical order. They put Apple last. And I think the reason they put Apple last is Apple's made a concerted effort to be the defender of privacy for consumers. And I do think privacy is a big concern for regulators.
Tom, I want to ask about the threat that the president just levied of executive orders. He tweeted about it, of course. He said, if Congress doesn't bring fairness to big tech, which they should have done years ago, I will do it myself with executive orders. In Washington, it has been all talk and no action for years, and the people of our country are sick and tired of it. Now, I have two questions related to this. First of all, the president has more been vocally concerned about what he perceives as anti-conservative bias among the social media companies. First of all, is that real? Does it exist, that bias? And second of all, is there a real threat of executive orders here? Or is that something that tech investors should be concerned about?
Well, starting with the latter first, President Trump has shown that he is frequently action and talk. That there are times where he makes big statements, but then he follows them up with action. So I think that on that regard, I do think that an argument can be made on the anti-conservative, but in defense of Facebook in particular, it's user-generated content. And yes, they have the opportunity to play the role of editor, but it's user-generated content. So I think that my greater concern with Facebook and with Google is that, again, they operate a duopoly in digital advertising. And I've watched them, for example, essentially take all the profitability out of retail and out of e-commerce on the companies that are advertising on their platform. And I think that's a big problem in general.
Hey, Tom, Rick Newman here. I want to ask you about Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act from way back in the early days of the internet. That part of the law basically provides a waiver from liability for tech platforms for what their users post. So that does not really apply to Amazon, does not really apply to Apple, but it does apply to Facebook big time. It applies to Google because of YouTube, and it also applies to Twitter, which is not at this hearing today. Do you see any plausible way to tighten that part of the law to make these companies more responsible for what their users put on the platforms?
I think it is possible, though I would argue in this case, in defense of Facebook, it may be challenging to implement that. So they can heavily leverage artificial intelligence, for example, to try to ensure that the content on their platform is not harmful or not detrimental or things of that nature. I think I've been fascinated with the Facebook boycott, with brands that at least are saying that on a short-term basis, they're going to withdraw their advertising efforts on Facebook because of some of the content on Facebook that is, not pleasant. So I would argue that yes, they could enact that, but it will pose a challenge for the companies like Facebook to try to fully police the content on their platform.
Tom, thanks for jumping in. Tom Forte, D.A. Davidson, Senior Research Analyst. Always good to see you. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.